What's going on, guys? RagingRaptor here, and I welcome you to a new World of Tanks video. And today we are going to have a look, there we go, at the 279's armor in a Armorguide. And as you might know, the 279 at the moment is being used pretty darn often in Clan Wars because it's just an incredible strong tank with decent speed and a very bouncy upper front plate, especially when the 279 is standing above of you and if the 279 is standing on a flat surface. As soon, and I can take this already, or say this already, as soon as you're standing above the 279, it will have a lot of troubles to actually use its very bulbous armor. So, as always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, we are going to start with the first tank of the bunch, and this is the Jagdtiger 88. And I know a lot of you people will say, but Raging, why do you take the Jagdtiger 88? Quite simple, it has an 88mm gun, which is the lowest caliber of what tier 8 medium tanks can have. And it has 212mm of penetration, which is slightly above average than what you usually would see on a tier 8 medium, but still, where you penetrate with a Jagdtiger 88, it is safe to say that you will most likely also be able to penetrate with a normal tier 8 medium tank. But after that, we are deciding to go to use tanks like the Chieftain and the 907 to test our tank against higher tiered opponents. Well, I tried to search for any position where you have the ability to penetrate the 279. Like the Mauerbrecher, for example, has a lot of weak spots frontally, or even some troll weak spots where you can pen. Even the Type 5 Heavy has a position where you can penetrate it, like have overmatch or auto pen most of the time, or you have overmatch against a tank, against it when it drives up a hill. The 279 on the other hand, it doesn't have that. The only legitimate weak spot frontally is those cupolas which we are shooting at right now. And this is a little bit of a bummer because they are still rather toughly armored. You can see with 212mm of penetration, we have it quite hard. And when it comes to those cupolas, guys, I would 100% enjoy if you would not shoot the left cupola, but shoot the right one. And this is just quite simple. The right one is much bigger and much flatter than it is the left one. And we can have a look at this in this armor model right here. As you can see, the cupola above are 210mm thick frontally. But as you can see, the left one is much smaller than the right one. So yeah, always try to go to the right one. And I can say that this cupola is a fairly good weak spot. When I played ranked battles in my Chieftain against the 279 early in, I don't know, in one of the maps with the big lake in the middle and you have the valley, I forgot the name of it. He went into the valley, as did I, because obviously Chieftain has a good gun depression and so on, a good turret. And the cupola was a consistent weak spot for me. So I can totally say, guys, try to go for this cupola weak spot when you have the opportunity. For a tier 8 tank, I can still say go for the cupola weak spot, but it is incredible hard, obviously, because, well, it is very small. Now I decide to show you how good or how bad is the side armor of the 279. And here is an interesting feature of this tank. The lower you go on the side armor, the more likely you are to go to penetrate it. So this is also an interesting feature about this tank. When we look at the side armor, you can see that usually it's rather well sloped upwards until it is more flat over here with 130mm. This part down here is 100mm thick, and well, there is a really interesting feature of this tank. You can see that we have here this round form right here, and then bam, a tiny, really tiny seam which is flat. And this is why I want to tell you, as if you have the side armor and you have problems penetrating this tank, go as low as possible to hit this seam. And usually when I looked at it, it looked like the further back you are, it is better for lower, but also the further forward you are. You cannot, however, penetrate the engine deck with an 88mm gun because it's just too small in a caliber's diameter. The cupola side armor are getting weaker and weaker, which makes it a little bit easier to penetrate the tank from its side when it's just showing its turret. Now I'm trying to search a really tiny choke spot, or just a spot where you could be able to penetrate it in like a weird angle. Again, for example, right now when the 279 is standing like this, he has, well, not like this anymore, but beforehand he had like this. He has no problems to hit us and penetrate us, and still I can highly recommend to go for the right cupola. Although the left one looks bigger, it is much harder to penetrate. Again, when we go back in the armor model, you can see as soon as this tank stands above of us, we have it looks bigger, but this part right here is 260mm thick, and the armor in general gets really wonky in general. So always go for the right one. It's higher and it's more consistent because it's flat armor, or flat round-ish armor. But then again, in such a position you have a really hard time to penetrate him. Again, he writes here, I can shoot on you. And then again, a big thank you to Felix from the German community manager team for lending his tank to us so we are able to penetrate him. Now, again, I'm trying to see if I'm able to somehow penetrate this guy's lower belly, because this tank definitely do not has a, well, lower plate. And sadly, it doesn't really work. The lower plate, or the belly of the beast, is 55mm thick, meaning everything which is not 165mm in caliber will bounce. The only thing I personally didn't test it is when you shoot heat in between those track links, because we all know that heat has no auto bounce angles, or a very steep rather, excuse me, 85 degrees if I'm not mistaken. So then you should be able to maybe penetrate this belly armor when it comes to some problems. But then again, you have to hit between the track links, otherwise the heat will just explode. It won't have enough penetration to go and penetrate this tank. I'm still trying to search if I'm able to get a decent angle on the 279, and I'm also trying to see if I'm able to penetrate the tracks to keep him tracked, and somehow this side armor, which again is just 100mm thick. It's still thick, but it's not too bad. And the better angle we get, the higher the chances are to go. Like right now we are still too much angled, so we have to drive slightly around, and well, there we go. Now we are finally able to keep him tracked. As you can see, the track link is still broken. And I apparently also ammo-racked him, as he wrote here. And we are able to more or less comfortably penetrate the 279. You can see he's still detracked, and now his strikes are up, but we could have retracked him again. So that's about it. That's what I can tell you when you are a low tier opponent against the 279. The side and rear armors are not that hard. I still recommend when you're shooting to the side armor either to go low and hit the seam, or just go high and hit this 130mm spot. The turret side is still a little bit bouncy, but the rear shouldn't be a problem. It's 90mm, 70mm for the turret. So yeah, that's totally where you can go for. And one more shot into cupola finishes off this 907. So now let's move on to the 279. Oh, excuse me, I want to say 907 now because we are heading to the 907 right now. So the 279 is probably the most used tier 10 medium tank in the game at the moment when it comes to Clan Wars and in general stats padding, if you want to call it like that. But yeah, the 279 is one of the tanks with 200, if I'm not mistaken, 264mm of penetration and 330mm of heat penetration. So both values are rather high and rather good, but you can see right now I know where to aim at on the 279, but we have still quite the trouble to penetrate him. And again, on a flat surface, the side shouldn't really pose any big troubles for us. But as soon as the 279 decides to go in a forward-facing position, you can see basically everything is red. And if you think that those few ports are weak spots, I have to prove you wrong. They are not even part of the damage model. And you can see in general the armor of the 279 frontally is, well, very symmetrical. As you can see here, we have a part of the lip, then comes the next part, and the next part, the next part, the next part, and the next part, next part, and more parts. So in general, there is no real weak spot on its upper front plate. Except for you can make your own weak spot in quotation marks. Obviously, you have to shoot premium rounds, however, because again, you can see with standard rounds on the 279, 907, excuse me, you have no, well, you can't penetrate it. Even behind the gun, it's still 330 millimeters thick, so we have no chance. But cupola, on the other hand, is very, very easily. Now we are loading the premium rounds or special rounds, the heat shells, 330 millimeters of penetration, and now we start to see results. And one thing I personally noticed about the 279's armor is if you want to penetrate it around 50% of the time, I'd suggest to you to look below this. I personally going to call it a mud skirt or a rain drain. I don't know for what it is, but it looks like a mud skirt, so the mud doesn't hit the viewports of the driver. But if you look at the middle viewport, below the mud skirt, in this T position, or in this line over here, you have the highest chance of penetrating 279 with premium rounds, or in general when you're shooting premium rounds. You can see here I'm doing the motion right there to show you, yep, up and down, up and down. The 279's gun mantle is still rather thick with 330 millimeters, but when we once again look at the armor model and take the things away, we have to note that behind the gun mantle, usually there is only 0 millimeters of armor. So as soon as you penetrate the gun mantlet, we are home free, except if you hit too far to the left or too far to the right, because then you are hitting those plates. And as you might also see, yes, this little roof plate over here, this green one, doesn't count as armor either. So you can hit here or here, but it's just 330 millimeters of armor. Well, just 330 millimeters of armor. The same goes for the turret front, but because it's always so rounded, it's quite hard to penetrate, so I would not really say go for that. But here you can see we are trying to hit this 330 millimeter plate in the back of the tank or of the gun mantlet, and it's a little tricky shot, but we should be able to do it. There we go, finally we penetrated, just to show you. Now I found a different weak spot. I'm not entirely sure. It worked well with the Jagdtiger 100. It is around here and around here behind the light. And we're going to see it in 2 games, and then I'm going to explain it a little bit further. Now I tried to go a little bit higher or above the tank to show you how strong or how weak the armor plate is, but we'll see this in just a second when we are using the Chieftain because of its great gun depression. And again, as now you can see, as soon as we are aiming low, and the third, like, it's best to aim low and forward. When you hit low and forward, you have the best angle of attack into the armor of the 279. As you might can see here, we are hitting in a much steeper angle. Right now, angle of incidence is 58 degrees, and back here it's 16 degrees, making the armor much more thicker. So always the more forward you are, the better, because then the angles are far better in your terms, or helping you to penetrate easier. Now we are once again back to APCR, and you can see as soon as we hit forward below that mud skirt, which is also not part of the damage model, you should be able to decently penetrate the side armor. And again, this is also where the ammo rack of the 279 is located. So now let's move on to the Chieftain. So the Chieftain itself is a formidable enemy, and again thanks to Mango Killer and Zishfrish for now giving me the chance to shoot at their 279s. The Chieftain has 270 millimeters of standard APCR penetration and 322 of special APCR penetration. So it has a little bit above average penetration for a heavy tank, but because it has APCR, it's sometimes even worse to actually penetrate the upper front plate of a 279 because of its very, very distinct angle. Well, the good thing, however, about the Chieftain is that when it had to go into a face hug with the 279, we should have no issue. And here you saw a tiny little trick, in quotation marks, I used when it comes to aiming for weak spots, but I'm going to talk about this in a separate video, to be honest. Well, as soon as a 279 is standing like this, it should be obvious to you guys to try to hit underneath this mud skirt, because again, we already talked about it, the angles are the best to hit. Other than that, you can be able to penetrate its upper front plate, because again, it's what's it called? It's not angled, well, it's circular like this, so when you hit like in that position, it's much easier to penetrate than hitting in something like this. But yeah, again, usually just go for its side armor in such a position, but when it stands frontally, you still have a very, very tough time to penetrate this tank. You might think yourself, well, maybe I can hit this lip down here, and you wouldn't be mistaken, it could be a weak spot. However, the issue is, it is a weak spot with 260 millimeters, but as you can see, it's angled downwards, meaning it has a decent chunk of additional effective armor, meaning it is around 300 and a little bit more armor. So now, again, the cupolas shouldn't be too big of an issue when you are a tier 10 tank. And now I am going into a face hug, and you can see we should have around a decent penetration rate of, well, I don't know, maybe around 60 to 70% even on the upper front plate of the 279 with standard rounds, to be precise, because we are shooting down onto the 279. So as long as you have now we are loading premium rounds to do some more shots into the upper front plate. So now Mango Killer wants me to show you and me, guys, where the ammo rack is, and it's apparently located around here. Again, we already saw this, and Phil also told us this. Now we are again having now premium rounds loaded, and as soon as the 279 is angling, again try to go for the side which is angled the worst or best towards you, and you shouldn't have too big of an issue. But with our premium rounds, you shouldn't have too big of a deal to penetrate him. You can see how our numbers jump a tiny touch. The middle is still going to be the most effective against APCR rounds. It is around 300 millimeters thick. Over here you can see 304. As higher we go, it gets stronger. The lower we go, it gets easier. And again, this spot right here looks very good, and I'm going to talk about this in the next clip where we use the Jagdtiger. But now we have one more 279 to shoot at, and you can see this spot is pretty decent. It's around, I don't know what this is called, if this is a part of the ladder, but it's around 300 millimeters thick of effective armor, which is great. The upper front plate shouldn't be too big of an issue when you're loading premium rounds. Again, keep in mind, as soon as the 279 starts to wiggle around, try to aim for the side which has the best angle towards you. Still, however, where you can't go wrong is, again, under the mud skirt in the middle and under the middle viewport down here. That's still the best spot to penetrate. I would highly suggest to not try to go for a turret, and now we are loading HE rounds, because HE usually can also help against the 279. We hit the turret, we did a little amount of damage, now we hit underneath the turret, which has also around 30 millimeters of armor. But my best guess is, if you want to annoy the living hell out of a 279, shoot HE at its tracks. Why exactly? Because then you are splashing up top into the 55mm underbelly. Bada bam, bada boom, you are a pretty decent chunk of damage. You could see in all the shots with HE in the underbelly, we did more than 130 damage, 2 being at 150 and 1 being at 136. So the other one which we shot here was just 82, and the one which hit the turret was, well, 0. And here I'm trying to aim for this lip again, but again, it looks like a weak spot, but it isn't. I can definitely not suggest to hit. Go for that weak spot over there. Now we are back on special rounds or premium rounds and trying to maybe shoot through the gun mantlet, but I personally don't suggest it. It's still really difficult to hit when you usually you should be able to hit the cupola up there just fine. But yes, if we get lucky and the replay goes, we can penetrate this gun mantlet here and there. But again, we have to be lucky, and there we go. Even with a high roll, we finish off zisch frisch. So again, underneath in this T section, underneath the middle viewport is the best bet for you to penetrate, and HE into the tracks is also a pretty good point. Now, Jagdtiger. So, the Jagdtiger. The Jagdtiger is one of the only few tanks which is able to overmatch the lower plate armor of the 279, or rather the belly armor of the 279, after they buffed it. 279's belly armor, as already stated, is 55mm thick, when we just have a quick look over here, and it's homogeneous, which is a little bit annoying. As you can see, there is no real weak spot as with other tanks it's just 55mm thick, but you need around you need to be above 165mm of caliber size to be able to overmatch this position. So this should be working pretty darn well for you, however. So as soon as a new tank comes into the game with a caliber which is bigger than 165mm, you know you can also penetrate the belly of the 279 as long as they are not changing it. And you can see, even in this steep angle, we have no issues whatsoever of penetrating this 279. But as soon as he hides his belly again, it will be pretty hard for us to penetrate. And the only real spot again would be the cupola over here. Maybe now with the Jagdtiger, even this one, because we have so good penetration values. Now, if the 279, however, drives on the open field and gives us his flat armor, we still shouldn't really have too much of an issue of penetrating this guy. Not going to go for the middle. You can see again it's around 290, 287 effective armor, and here we are getting a quite interesting spot. Again, above this ladder looking thing, it's just 271mm of effective armor apparently. And that is pretty darn nifty if you ask me. And it is, apparently it looks like it is somewhat of a weak spot. And I can just explain it with being this 120mm plates over here and over here that we are able to hit. Because they are just in the right amount of angle and just in the right amount of position to be able to penetrate. It's still, however, a pretty hard shot to nail, and it's easier to hit the right side because you can just aim at the light and you're good to go. But when the left side, you have to look, you should aim a little bit left of the ladder and you should maybe be able to penetrate. And here we go, 3 out of 3 on the 279. Now, we have just one more tank to look at. And this is a little bit of a troll pick in quotation marks. It's just me trying to show you if this tank actually has a spot you can overmatch with lower caliber rounds. And obviously that HE is still effective. The last tank on our list to finish off the 279 is the infamously bad and my recently free Mark Churchill game carrier. And well, this is just purely to do a weird flex on you guys, no, but also to show you guys that this tank, it has a 94mm gun. And as far as I know, this is the smallest caliber which is above 90mm, but please, well, go correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, the Object 279 early, it has a spot which is only, in quotation marks, 30mm thick, meaning we are able to do overmatch on it, but it is very hard to hit when the tank is standing like this. But you can see I'm already aiming at it and it's pretty obvious by now what it is, and it is the engine deck. The engine deck of the 279 is only 30mm thick, meaning that most of the time you should be able to penetrate it if you are shooting AP rounds on a caliber which is bigger than well, 90 millimeters. You can see we hit here. It's very weird looking shot, but well, that's what happens when you hit the tank's armor in a very weird angle. Well, but again, you can see it is not that easy to hit this spot. And the roof is not 30 millimeters thick, it's only the engine deck which is 30 millimeters thick. And here you can see a new shot, and once again we penned him quite easily, in quotation marks. Another good thing about the Churchill gun carrier is it actually has a pretty darn good gun, meaning it is comparable to a tier 8 heavy tank gun, like again 220 millimeters of AP penetration, 252 millimeters of APCR penetration. And again, as soon as you're standing slightly above 279, most of its armor magic is going to vanish. Which is pretty cool to us, to be honest. But once again, you can see we are now shooting AG. We hit into the tracks for 90 damage, which is not much, but it's still better than nothing. Obviously, if you're able to hit the engine deck, we're doing much more, because the armor there is only 30 millimeters thick compared to the armor thickness of the belly, which is, well, 55 millimeters thick. And this will look like this. You can see when we put out the 30 millimeter armor, this is the whole engine neck, it's 30 millimeters thick, and I heard from some people already that you can penetrate the 279 early pretty easily with an artillery piece when you're getting lucky. There are also some minor spots of 30 millimeters armor right below the turret ring, or rather here, but I didn't had any luck on hitting this piece of armor right here, because it might look a little bit weird, but it is hidden underneath this 330 millimeter armor ring, so it is incredibly hard to hit. So this is why I decided against of showing it to you guys. But then again, just to make it complete, oh, this was a little bit too fast, and this is now a little bit too slow, so here we go. The armor of the turret, it looks like it's extending above here slightly, and this part down here is this 30 millimeter thickness, but it is super small, and I think it's very hard to hit. So yeah, I don't really suggest to try to hit this spot over here with a small gun. But yeah, this is what we have left of the 279. We are even able to, when we are lucky, to penetrate over here, because again the angle is angled towards us, making it easier to penetrate those spots. But we got a little bit unlucky in our pen rolls, so yeah. Another thing is, when you are shooting at this 90 millimeter weak spot, I do hope you are ready to load some AP rounds and not APCR rounds, because the APCR's worse normalization will lead to more bounces. Now we load to the APCRs, and you can see now we are starting to bounce once more. So again, keep this in mind when you are shooting for overmatch spots. Load APs, no APCRs, no heats when possible. Otherwise you will still bounce. And you can see it's still a hard spot to hit. I think it is comparable to hitting the IS-4's roof, but it is a weak spot. It can work. Artillery can poop on the 279, and well, that's about it. This is the 279's armor guide. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you learned a lot, and I think when you really need to don't forget about things, I'd say it is, if you want to reliably penetrate the 279, go for the cupolas. They are each 210 millimeters thick. Right one being the best one because it's bigger. When you want to penetrate with premium rounds, I'd suggest when the tank is standing frontally to you, underneath this mud skirt dash rain drain, underneath the middle what's it called, the middle viewport, or left side of this ladder, or right into the lamp, which is sadly now missing because it got blown away. To the side armor wise, I'd suggest the lower the better, or the higher here is best. When you are shooting at an angle at the 279, I'd suggest to try and hit down here below the mud skirt where it is weakest, or in general this seam down here, which when we are, ooh, it's a little bit flimsy to look at, but you can see here it's almost flat down here. This is the weakest part of the side armor. Don't try to hit us down here because this is not weak. This is just non-existing space armor. Also, when you want to fuck over a 279, this part over here is ammo rack. This part back here obviously is engine and fuel tanks, because when I looked at the post-game stats of this game right here, I damaged and destroyed the fuel tanks with the last shots over here. And yeah, I think that's about it. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, let me know in the comment section below. What can I do better as well? I'm always happy for some feedback. If you're new to the channel and want to see more videos like this, then feel free to leave me a subscription as well. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention. Feedback is always welcome, and I'll always see you in a next video. Cheers.